So what is the difference between a rehab centre or a treatment centre and a 12-step program and fellowship? Perhaps you are in a rehab centre at the moment, or you've been in one in the past, and they take you, some of them at least, take you to 12-step meetings as part of that process. These days, it's very common, in fact most common, that people who find themselves in 12-step programs get introduced to them through a rehabilitation centre or a treatment centre. And in other centres and rehabs, they will actually take you through the first few steps, typically steps 1, 2 and 3, while you're in there. And so the distinction between a rehab centre and a 12-step program isn't always perfectly clear. There's an old analogy given by, he was an AA member called Clancy, and he tells a story, and it's related to alcoholism and AA, but it can really be applied to any 12-step program. He tells a story about a man drowning in the ocean. And while he's drowning, 2 people come by in what appears to him to be an invisible boat. And they tell the man to get in the boat. And the man drowning says, "What do you mean? I don't see any boat. You 2 guys are crazy." And the 2 guys say, "Well, you want to get in or not?" And he says, there's nothing there to get in, so leave me alone. And so the 2 guys in the invisible boat go away. And then a nice, visible streamliner comes by, called the SS Rehab Centre. And it has room and boards, and you can stay on there for 28 days or longer, obviously for a fee. And they have all these programs and all of these practices, and they invite you on board. And so obviously, you go on there. It's something visible, it's tangible, it makes sense. So you pay your money and you go in. And then for 28 days, you are sort of kept safe and protected, and everything goes quite well. And they're obviously attempting to bring you to the shores of sobriety. And you can imagine that as being an island. But actually, all they're able to do is take you close to the island, but they can't actually drop you off there. So they get about 2 miles out, and then they say, "Okay, now it's time for you to go the last bit on your own." And so they put you back in the water and they tell you to swim. Now, most people in that whole process, they may have done many things, but they haven't learned how to swim. And so within a short period of time, they find themselves drowning again. Again, the 2 people in the boat from the 12-step program come along. The boat's still invisible, and they ask the guy who's drowning to get in. Again, he says, "There's nothing to get in, you guys are crazy." And maybe he goes again on the liner for the rehab centre, and maybe he does that a few times, and keeps finding himself in the same position. Time and time again, he finds himself drowning. He's not able to actually reach this long-term sobriety from whatever the thing is that is trying to get it. And so eventually he says he's either going to die or he's going to try and get in this invisible boat that these people from this 12-step program are talking about. And so he finds himself, he throws himself in this boat that he can't see. And then he says, "Okay, what next?" And the 2 guys say, "Start rowing." And the guy says, "But there's nothing to row. There's no oars. I can't see anything." And they just say, "Just start rowing, just start rowing." And as he starts to pretend to row, and he feels stupid and nothing makes sense, but as he starts to do that, the boat starts to appear. And suddenly, as he takes the actions and he continues to row, the oars appear and the boat appears, and suddenly he can see that there is a boat there. Now that analogy, that fable, whatever you want to call it, it's not a perfect description of the differences, but it's pretty good. It's pretty accurate in many ways. And he also ends that story by saying that when you're in that boat, if you stop rowing, if you stop doing the things that you need to do and do them consistently, then eventually the boat starts to disappear again, and eventually you'll find yourself once more in the ocean. But that again is not really a topic for newcomers or people who are kind of at the beginning of their recovery journey. But it does help to get to grips with this idea of, like, if you're in a rehab center or if you've been to rehab centers and you haven't been able to stay sober and clean, or, whether it's gambling or whatever it is, it helps to explain why. Because the necessary actions and changes that you do in the rehab center don't actually give you the sufficient change enough that you're able to keep it going outside of there. And the thing that's really nice about that story and true is the way that the 12-step program is kind of introduced, because from the perspective of the new person, when they look at 12-step recovery, when they look at the meetings, when they look at the people, it doesn't really seem that there's anything there. It doesn't really seem that there's a solution there that is really going to help with their problems. The rehab centers are really good at tailoring things very specifically to you and doing all of these things to make you kind of feel very, valued and special, and the treatment is really individualized. And you would think that that is what would make the big difference. And in the 12-step program, sometimes they tell you to just sort of get with the program and accept this general solution. And it really doesn't seem, when you're new, like that is something that is going to work. And I touched on this in the last video with a little bit of a different story, but the idea is the same, that when you're new, from the perspective of someone who hasn't engaged fully with the process, it's really hard to see how that process is actually going to help you. And it's only once you start taking the actions and you get engaged in the program, which is not really the meetings. And again, I spoke about that in the last video. It's not the meetings of the 12-step program, but it's the actual 12-step program. That once you start taking those steps and you start taking those actions with a sponsor, that you actually start to see this solution that appears around you. So if you are new, or you're kind of new and you're kind of wondering of the differences, or you've tried rehabs and it didn't work, maybe you think you've tried 12-step recovery and it didn't work, I would ask you just a simple question about, to what extent did you try 12-step recovery? Did you try some meetings? Did you try steps 1, 2, and 3 in a rehab center? Because unless you got to steps 9, really, usually the transformation isn't sufficient enough to give you much of a solid recovery from whatever the thing is that you're seeking recovery from. So hopefully this gives you a different way of looking at rehab centers and treatment centers and 12-step programs. It helps to not make too much judgment from the position of being new, because from the perspective, it's the way that we tend to look at things. I remember when I was really new, the way that I was looking at things, nothing made any sense. It just didn't make sense that this place was going to be able to help me and these people were going to be able to help me. It doesn't make any sense to a logical mind or to an intellectual person or even common sense. It doesn't seem to make sense. But the experience of myself and of so many other people, that once you actually engage with the process and you take the steps with somebody else, things start to change and the boat starts to appear. So hopefully this encourages you to take the next step as to whatever that is. If you have any other questions, by all means, like I said, please let me know. As I always say, these thoughts and experiences are my own. They're not official to anything. I don't speak on behalf of anything or am affiliated with anything. Just trying to share my experience and my understandings of this process, which in my own life has given me so much freedom and joy that there's a deep kind of desire to share that with others who struggle in the same way that I struggled in the beginning, by nothing making sense and trying to figure it all out and not being able to. So hope that's helpful. If you have any other questions, let me know, and take care.